Well, good afternoon and welcome to Save California Salmon and Humboldt State University's Advocacy and Water Protection in Native California Summer Speakers and Certification Program. We are committed to providing this series for free, but if you support this work, please consider donating to Save California Salmon or volunteering to help. If you miss any presentations, including core classes, they're available on YouTube at the Humboldt State University's Native American Studies page. Links to the presentations and background materials will be posted on Save California Salmon's website on our education page. Please also know that more detailed classes on many of the subjects that we will address are available through Humboldt State University's Native American Studies program. We would like to begin the day by acknowledging that no matter where our speakers are presenting from, we are on Native land. I am here in Yurok territory today, and Save California's board and staff is based in Yurok, Karuk, Winnemem, Wintu, Pomo, Hoopa Valley, Talowa, Shasta, Wiyot, Maidu, Ohlone, and Miwok territories. We would also like to say happy Juneteenth and voice support for all the people around the world that are fighting to dismantle systematic racism and for police accountability. We are in solidarity with the Black Lives and dismantling systematic racism. Systematic racism and colonialism impacts almost every aspect of people's lives, including the environment, water, health, and food policies in the state. This is true in California, where over 1 million people do not have access to clean water, and many Native people do not have access to traditional foods or lands, or are unrecognized. Locally, where I live on the Klamath, many people, including people that could be presenters for this series, do not have access to technology or power, and therefore cannot engage in online learning and decision-making during this crisis. Last, we wish to acknowledge that we support the removal of the racist statues throughout Sacramento and the Bay Area this week, and we will be giving an update on that effort when Morningstar speaks. So with that said, I'm going to start my screen sharing so that I can give a little introduction today. I also like to apologize for the technology issues we had this morning, but I think we're back on track. So the Bay Delta is a heavily impacted watershed. There are over 1,400 dams in California, and many are in the Bay Delta and tributaries. The Delta and Sacramento and San Francisco Bay suffer from many levees and dikes also that really impact the habitat here. Many of the Bay Delta watersheds used to have abundant runs of salmon and other fish that utilized the cold water in the upper watersheds. There were even runs of salmon for every season, which Native people were able to harvest. Now that so much of the watershed is diked, dammed, and diverted, there is little habitat for salmon left. This has led to the winter run and spring run salmon, green sturgeon, and Delta smelt facing extinction. Reverse flows from the large diversions in the Delta also threaten fish. Most of the dams in the Delta do not have fish passage, and that leaves upstream tribes without a valuable food source. These dams and diversions are mainly part of the Central Valley state and federal water projects. These projects use many of the same diversions and canals, but they do operate different dams. For instance, Shasta Dam is a federal dam, where Oroville would be a state dam. The Federal Water Project alone has 20 dams, and the State Water Project has 21 dams and more than 700 miles of canals and pipelines. The Federal Water Project is managed by the Bureau of Reclamation, and it mainly feeds farms and large agribusiness. The State Water Project is managed by the Department of Water Resources, and is mainly fed from water from the Sierras, and it mainly feeds cities and towns. The projects are usually analyzed together and coordinated in their operations, but this is not necessarily true right now due to some of the arguments over the Trump water plan, which Barbara will go through. Along with impacting the Central Valley and Serra watersheds, the Central Valley state and federal water projects also impact the Trinity and Klamath rivers. The Trinity River is diverted into the Sacramento River near the Shasta Reservoir, and that's how our watersheds are connected. Some of the current processes that are impacting the Central Valley and Bay Delta watersheds in Bay Delta right now are the Trump water plan, a state water plan, a proposal to raise the Shasta Dam, a proposal to build the site's reservoir and for new diversions to feed that, a proposal to build the Temperance Flat Dam, a permanent contract for one of the top diverters, the Westlands Water District, dam relicensing for private dams throughout the watershed, which there are many, and the Delta Water Quality Control Plans updates, phase 1 and 2, which are supposed to restore flows into different parts of the watershed. We also have many agricultural pollution permits to deal with, as many of the watersheds are heavily polluted by ag pollution. And there are many water rights application and water rights fights within the Delta. So how much water is taken is decided by how water rights are allocated. However, there is much more water rights allocated than water exists, and this is called paper water, and it's a huge issue in California. And tribes also have senior water rights when water rights adjudications happen. How that plays into this watershed is yet to be seen, really, as most of the tribal water rights cases have not happened here. So California is home to many tribes, and we'll go through this more so later in the presentation. But many of the tribes that are in this watershed do not have established fishing and established water rights. Some tribes have rancherias, and there are a few reservations, but not a whole lot. And there were more Indian allotment and land claims, but we'll go through that a little more also later. But one thing to remember is that native lands were targeted purposefully for reservoirs and for building reservoirs throughout the whole water system. So when we look at this map of tribes in California, you'll notice a lot of the places, a lot of tribal territories are where there's large water projects and large dams right now. And quite a lot of tribes in California did lose their lands through the building of reservoirs. So I have a short video to play where Caleen is the star that kind of goes into this a little more. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong video. Okay, that's not working, so.
The Winnemem elders stayed strong throughout the last century. Leaders such as Alfred Gillett and Florence Jones were at the forefront of a statewide campaign to sue the federal government because of the 18 broken treaties in California. And in 1946, Congress set up a commission to settle land claims.
And in the winning of that lawsuit, we also won the recognition of being Indians eligible for services and
Regina, we can't hear the video. I think you need to unmute. unheard and unseen.
Sorry, I'm going to start it from the beginning.
Unrecognized tribe.
The Winnemem elders stayed strong throughout the last century. Leaders such as Alfred Gillett and Florence Jones were at the forefront of a statewide campaign to sue the federal government because of the 18 broken treaties in California. And in 1946, Congress set up a commission to settle land claims.
And in the winning of that lawsuit, we also won the recognition of being Indians eligible for services and benefits from the United States in the taking of our lands, which included health, education, housing, jobs, that kind of thing.
But in the 1980s, for most of California's tribal people, a new label, unrecognized, erased those hard-won compensations. The Bureau of Indian Affairs had created a list of recognized tribes which the agency would continue to deal with, and thousands of people whose tribes were not on the list were suddenly denied services, benefits, and protections.
Now we're sitting in a position where we're unheard and unseen as an unrecognized tribe. And so we're like, had a brief period between the 70s and the 80s where it was not illegal to practice our religion. We use eagle feathers in our dance, in our prayers, and it's an integral part. You have to have a permit to hold eagle feathers, and they've revoked that from Winnemem.
It's from the Fish and Wildlife Service, stating that the Winnemem Wintu, you are not affiliated with a federally recognized tribe. Oh, they're a little late in finding out. It's like 25 years.
It's also education. You know, in 1978, I graduated high school and got a Bureau of Indian Affairs higher education grant. In 1989, when I tried to go back, I'm no longer eligible for those services. Here I am, Indian from when I was born to 1986. They counted me. I was an enrolled California tribal member. I have an Indian roll number. But now I'm no longer eligible for those services.
They're telling me that I don't know my ways. I don't know who my people are. I don't, my father, my mother, they're also native. They're Winnemem. They're saying that they're not Winnemem. Their mothers and fathers before that, they're saying they're not Winnemem because I'm not. And those are all my blood relatives.
There should not be any unrecognized Indians in California because we have the judgment roll that goes back to 1850. Before California became a state. And every descendant thereof is a recognized Indian and had been up until the 1980s. That terminology should never be allowed to exist this day and age with human rights and the rights of indigenous people to continue to exist.
The Winnemem elders stayed strong throughout the last century. Leaders such as Alfred Gillett.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that, little technical difficulties today. But I just felt it was important that we share a little bit about why so many of the tribes within the watershed are not recognized and therefore have trouble claiming their water and fishing rights and also being properly consulted when our major water decisions. So with that, I would like to introduce Morningstar Kelly, who is the tribal water organizer for Save California Salmon, and also part of different police accountability and statute removals and justice programs for Native people within California. Thank you for being here today, Morningstar.
Thank you so much for having me, Chichizola. It's really good to be here with all of you. We've had a pretty incredible and busy week. I just want to acknowledge that it's been 24 days now since we have been in the streets and in solidarity with the George Floyd actions. So I helped to coordinate a committee through the Anti-Police Terror Project in Sacramento. We coordinate the Healing Justice Committee that provides support to families that have been impacted by police terrorism. So it's been a really busy couple of weeks where we are providing trainings such as Know Your Rights training, Cop Watch trainings, street medic training to ensure the safety of our relatives and community members. This week, excuse me, this week we had a couple of victories where we had 3 statues come down. And so that has been, you know, the fruition of many years, decades of work by local tribes, by community members. So it was the John Sutter statue in front of Sutter Hospital that came down on Monday. On Tuesday, while we were holding an event in recognition of that, we received word that the Queen Isabella and Columbus statue are coming out of the state capitol rotunda. And then as of Thursday morning, the Columbus statue that sat atop Coit Tower in San Francisco was also pulled off. And so I just wanted to give that update, and in acknowledgement of the Juneteenth celebrations that are taking place. For those that are local within the Sacramento area, there is a Black Justice event that will be taking place at Cesar Chavez Plaza today at 6 p.m. So we will be there for the opening of that. So, sorry, it changed to Barbara's over there. So I will start my slideshow here, and we can talk about the efforts with Save California Salmon. Okay, is that working?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so I'll just start by saying that it really is an honor to work with Save California Salmon and alongside such incredible people that are very much dedicated to protecting our lifeways and our culture. So as was mentioned earlier, this is a map of California and our unratified treaty lands, our state boundaries, that California is home to many tribes over, we're very unique and diverse, where we have 109 federally recognized tribes, which is considered federally recognized, over 50 considered NFR tribes, non-federally recognized. We have tribes that within California, we have unacknowledged, terminated, disenrolled, and disenfranchised tribal members. And I also want to acknowledge that that tribes have been left out within the CARES tribal set-aside programs, that unacknowledged tribes do not operate Indian Health Service clinics and have historically been deemed ineligible, and tribes that are not considered federally recognized were also not addressed in Governor Newsom's apology that was made 1 year ago. And so we held an event at the state capitol yesterday, just in that 1 year anniversary, and saying that apology needs to be met with action, and we have not seen any action within this past year. And so one avenue of that is the Junipero Serra statue they're at the state capitol that lists all of the California missions, and that absolutely needs to come down as well. So there is a photo. You know, I worked for my tribe. I worked for Pit River Tribe for over 4 years as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. If you go to the Tribal Advisor website, I'm still listed as the TIPO, and it's been 4 years now. So that just shows how slow that they move within the state and within the work that they are doing to even keep that information updated. In working for my tribe and advocating outside of my tribe as a tribal member, we've really learned, you know, how they keep us inundated with these tribal meetings. And so I know that Caleen can speak more to that and is very familiar with, they'll hold meetings in Sacramento, they'll hold meetings in Redding, they'll hold meetings in Santa Rosa. They do this intentionally to not only wear us down, but you know, it's a capacity issue for sure. And so being in Sacramento, I've been able to attend more of the meetings and be able to provide more comments, more public comments. But it still is, you know, there's so much that needs to be done on the state's end in terms of proper engagement with tribes and tribal peoples. So I just wanted to share a little bit of information. So this is my own tribal homeland of Pit River. This is shown of the Pit River and Hat Creek and Burning Creek. And so these are some of our waterways that for us as Isawi, as Pit River peoples, that our water flows from Medicine Lake to the Fall River, to the Pit River, to the Sacramento River, down to the Bay Delta, and flows out into the San Francisco Bay. And so when you know, we use terms like Toloquaitu.com, we are all related. Like, we are all related. We are all, you know, the water that I am next to here within the Sacramento River is directly from our homelands, is direct, you know, it's all connected throughout our waterways. But we don't have salmon on our rivers. We have not had salmon on our rivers for over 80 years now. You know, there's been a lot of conversations around PG&E and you know, what has started with the fires and how PG&E has not been accountable to California residents. But through my tribe and surrounding tribes, we have been fighting PG&E for many decades, and PG&E never fulfilled their promise of instilling fish ladders within the dams on our rivers. And so I think I may just end there. Here's a photo of the salmon bake from the youth camp that took place last September. And you know, this is really a big part of all of the advocacy, is ensuring that these lessons are being taught and handed down to our youth. I know that was very instrumental in, you know, when I was a teenager, I participated in a camp called Camp Salmon River People that was provided by Humboldt State and took youth from, tribal youth from all over the North State. And we spent 2 weeks camping all along the Klamath and learning all that we could in both from the fisheries, from elders, lots of stories that were shared. And so that's been a part of my advocacy in ensuring that our youth are also having those opportunities that were shared and passed down to us. And so here is a flyer of some of the actions that we've held for the public hearings. So that one was Sacramento, Redding, and then here is our next generation of the youth leading the way with that. And this last slide, you know, it's really sad and it's really frustrating at times, because this whole fish versus farms narrative that they use farm workers and they use, you know, indigenous peoples and pitting us against one another, because we know that this isn't necessarily, you know, fish versus farms, that we're all fighting big ag, that we know that it is big ag that is polluting our waters and polluting our lands, and that it's indigenous peoples that don't have the access to clean drinking water. And so this was a rally when we were in Sacramento, and there was a busload of migrant farm workers that were bussed over to the Capitol to basically challenge us and tell us that fish preferred lighter flows and that fish preferred less water, and that the Stop the Water grab is that for us to advocate for the water, not to, you know, so that we're having enough water within our rivers means less water for their farms. And so I'll just end with that and hand it back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Morningstar. 1 second. Unfortunately, our next presenter was having some technical difficulties, so we're waiting for her to call back in, so we'll probably have her go last. So I wanted to introduce the chief of the Winnemem Wintu tribe, Caleen Sisk, and she's going to talk about the Shasta Dam raise, sites, reservoirs, and other threats to the Winnemem Wintu tribe, and also about their work to bring the salmon back above the Shasta Dam, which is so amazing. So so glad you can make it today, Caleen.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, those are pretty big topics. We've been working on for like 20 years. In the last 10 years, we've been, you know, battling in the meetings. And I think people need to start recognizing some of the terms like Westlands Water District, one of the largest water districts in the world. And they are the culprit that continues to suck the rivers dry, suck the dams dry, and rob everybody of the water, including the fish. And for us, you know, it's like we need to express to people, why is it that we, you know, fighting for the water for the fish? Because remember, Morningstar said that we don't have water rights. We haven't adjudicated our water rights. We don't have fishing rights. We can't go down on the Sacramento River and fish for salmon. Yet the tribes are fighting for the salmon to have water to come up the river. And it's like, overall, you have to look at the bigger picture of the ecology of the environment, and what does it need for all life, all of us. And it's been doing without the fish for over 80 years. This has to stop. This is coming to an end. That once that end comes, that water is not going to be as good. It's not going to do the things that you want it to do, because people are not giving back anything to the riverbeds, to the river, to the soils, to the high mountain waters. I mean, we're talking about our salmon have to be able to climb a mountain. They have to climb up 5,000 to 7,000 feet to get to their spawning grounds. So the fish hatchery fish that people might think they're relying on, or the farm fish, those things are dying out. And I think that NOAA and some of the other fisheries realize what's going on with that, and now have restoration plans to get the fish above the rim dams. It was a lawsuit, of course, but in that lawsuit, the biological opinion made it clear that to restore salmon, they had to get above these rim dams, including Shasta Dam, Orville Dam, Bryant, and some of the other ones. But they're starting with the Shasta Dam, which is it is baffling because at the same time they're starting with the Shasta Dam to restore salmon above the dam itself, they're also preparing documents to raise the dam. So it's like, if the dam's not high enough already for figuring out how to get fish over or around it, they're going to raise it higher to make it a little more difficult. They'll flood a little more of the McCloud River, giving Westlands more water. At the same time, they're supposed to be restoring the salmon. And, you know, I think there more and more people need to start looking at what are our commitments and what do we need to do about making sure that water is living, that water is alive, that our riverbeds are healthy. And we need those fish to be able to do that. They're the ones that turn the rocks over and aerate the bottom of the river. They feed everything in the river from the time that they're eggs to the time they come back as adults. They feed everything. They feed the bugs, they feed other fish in the rivers and the ocean. They feed the birds, the bears. They feed us, and they feed the soil. They feed the trees. And we shouldn't look at that as like a low marker element that we're dealing with, fish or farms. It's like, and we're at this point in time where we realize GMO farming is going out. Farms in the Fresno Valley, San Joaquin Valley area are polluted. And now, I don't know if you know that Westlands Water District is trying to dump their selenium into the aqueduct for all of the water drinkers below them to deal with. And it's like nobody's looking, or nobody understands what does that mean. There's no way of getting rid of selenium. And so what they're going to do is they're just going to put it in the aqueduct and ship it on down to LA and San Diego for them to deal with, I guess. But, you know, our struggle continues. You know, we have a story about salmon and that how we're related and how we come out of Mount Shasta together, and that salmon has always been there for us, helped us. From the very beginning, they gave us their voice so that we could communicate. We could do some things here on Earth that, you know, find out what our jobs are supposed to be. And as Winnemem, we always feel like we should be talking for the salmon because they gave us the voice. They can't talk. They can't yell at us anymore. They can't yell at the fishermen. You know, they can't show any emotion to that, what's happening. And so, you know, us, whatever's happened to the salmon, I feel like, you know, it's totally happening to us. You know, they blocked, by Shasta Dam, they blocked all the salmon from going up our river. And they also blocked us from living on our river. And now the salmon population is diminishing. And so is the population of the Winnemem people. And so it's like, we realize that whatever happened to salmon is inevitably going to happen to us, which means happens to people, not just Winnemem, but people overall. And that's so hard to explain to people, that this is not just a scientific do this, do that kind of thing, because, you know, you can talk to Noah and say, you know what, all of your science for all of these years to restore salmon has not worked. And now you want to restore salmon using those exact same plans of truck and haul, you know, trap and haul them, when it doesn't work now. And it's like, why can't we just build a waterway? Why can't we allow the fish to swim into their native waters and out again? That's what has to happen. And even though they'll say, gee, that's really expensive, that's expensive. It's like, how expensive is it? Because we know that it costs $80 million a year for Shasta Dam to operate and run its cold water pool from Redding to Red Bluff. if they built a waterway, which we've introduced from Cow Creek, you know, we do the run for salmon, and we've taken the Cow Creek exit off of the Sacramento River, that a waterway could be established right up Dry Creek and into Shasta Lake. That, maybe it's expensive, but does it cost $80 million? Does it cost $160 million? You know, every year it's going to be cheaper because you're not going to have to spend the $80 million on the cold water pool. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. And all of the other bright ideas of, you know, dumping gravel in the river. Let's make more salmon beds. It's like, really, can the humans decide where the salmon are going to spawn by dumping gravel in the river? It's like the river decides where to move those rocks. And what they have ultimately accomplished is to fill up the deep pools that were in the Sacramento River, where the salmon would pool during the hot, drier months, to fill them up halfway. So 20-foot deep pools are now 10-foot deep because bright-eyed biologists decided to dump gravel into the river to create more spawning beds, instead of spend all that money and build a waterway. It's like, why don't you just want to do that? And of course, you know, we're a tribe that has, we have the native salmon from the Cloud River swimming in New Zealand. And so while we're trying to work with DWR and the Water Board and NOAA, all trying to figure out the restoration of salmon, is like, we are still saying, we are your best bet. We are your strongest advocates for restoring salmon. But we don't want those hatchery fish up there. We don't want the farm fish up there. We want you to retrieve the New Zealand salmon that were from here and bring back that strain of the McCloud River salmon. And in doing that, you know, we're still, we still have to deal with PG&E just as the Pit River tribe does, and to, you know, make sure that those Pit 1 all the way through 10 or so develops their ladders, their fish ladders, which they should have already done, not because they're salmon, but because they have rainbow trout. And the rainbow trout are also migratory, but they're trapped between these pit houses on the river, you know. And so it's like the smartest guys about fish need some help, but they don't really know that they do, and they're not going to take it from, you know, unrecognized tribe. You know, we don't have any salmon on our river anymore, so what could we know about that? But I think that if you look at the plans of the Delta Tunnel, the tribes cannot allow that Delta Tunnel to be built because they will suck every bit of water out of the Sacramento River and ship it as soon as they have the permits to do so. The site's reservoir is an off-stream reservoir. It has no way to fill other than by taking water from the Sacramento River to fill it, which means taking water from the salmon to store, which will get warm, and then release it back into when Westlands needs it. So it doesn't really make sense to me. And then to raise Shasta Dam by 18.5 feet, flooding more of the McCloud River, and not dealing with the toxic sludge in the bottom of Shasta Dam. And they're building on a very old dam. And this dam also has earthquake fault line that runs through it. So it doesn't really make sense, but these are the efforts that we're fighting against. And we just don't have enough people to show up at all the meetings. That's kind of what it's nice to have Morningstar in Sacramento because, you know, we're not on their list for them to call to say, hey, we need a meeting. We have to find these things out and then show up at that meeting. And then they don't really know what to do with us. They have to answer the questions. because the Delta tunnel is not dealing with the cultural aspects of the village sites that are all around that area. So anyway, you know, if there's folks out there who have the ability to pitch in and help and do some stuff, bring the kids out and understand the plans, because this impacts all of our future generations. All of the kids that are coming up are going to be subjected to however this plays out with the Westlands dumping the selenium. You know, they tried to get water, or permanent water, allocated to them, an unlimited amount, which it didn't go. So that was a good thing. But they're always trying to do something like that, right? So regardless of tribes that are recognized or not recognized, other tribes need to wake up and start pitching in on this water plan. You know, stop the casino focus so much that you are forgetting about the waterfowl, you're forgetting about the fish, you're forgetting about the water, and come back to that so that you can help. So anyway, I think I'll end right there. And
thank you so much, Caleen, for your work and your leadership on bringing the salmon back to the upper basin into the McCloud River. With that, I would like to welcome Barbara Paragon-Perea. She is the ED of Restore the Delta, and she is also a Stockton resident and a local advocate for communities that are impacted in the environmental justice community within the Stockton area. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Barbara.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yep.
we can.
Okay, great. I've had to run around my house a little bit. For some reason, I kept losing audio and video. So I'm standing at a dresser in a bedroom to actually make things work so I could connect and see you at the moment. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm ready to share with you. And so you're going to lose me here in a second. And let's see if that's correct. There we go. Okay. Or I guess I'm off on the side. Welcome. I'm honored and grateful to be able to join this wonderful panel today to talk with issues related to the Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta, the San Francisco Bay Delta Estuary. Restore the Delta, for people who don't know us, is a grassroots organization that was put together 14 years ago. We grown from 60 members, 70 members to over 60,000 followers throughout the state. We were the leaders in the fight to stop the twin tunnels. We continue to fight against the single tunnel. How we fight has changed a little bit because new administration, how things are being done. We're also the advocates for water quality locally in the Delta. We work heavily with environmental justice communities. If you visit our website, you will find an environmental justice report. It was the first comprehensive one really written for the Delta in a number of years that deals with everything from climate change to the history and claims of water rights for tribes within the Delta. As Caleen said, there's a lot happening right now related to projects that relate to protection and preservation of historic villages for the Yokuts and Miwok people. That is folded into our work. And if you visit our website for more recent work, you'll find some really detailed updates that we've done recently about Westlands Water District. We have some more work that's going to be published early next week. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about why does the San Francisco Bay Delta matter? Why does it matter for fisheries? How do we solve the conveyance challenge? And what's happening with federal and state water management outcomes right now? some more details about the Trump Water Plan, and then how does this all kind of dovetail or relate with the State Water Project and its operations in Delta Conveyance. This is a very quick look at rivers and estuary and water projects for California and how it kind of all feeds into and through the Delta. This map is important because it reminds us where the water is located and where it drains. About half the state's waters drain through the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary here in the middle. And as you know, for people up in Humboldt and in the northern part of the state, you live with the waters and the watersheds that feed our system. And of course, the constant challenge is that so many of our people in our state live in those desert areas. Live in those desert areas that don't receive, the same amount of rainfall. So we're all going to be in a position where we're sharing water. The problem is, how do we do that at a sustainable level? This picture is important because people forget that the interior delta, which is one of 2 inverted deltas in the world, is actually attached to and part of the San Francisco Bay Delta region. This is the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas for both North and South America. It's an inverted delta, which means the freshwater areas are in the inside. And at Antioch, that's where you start crossing into gradually more salty water, of course, until you hit the ocean. It's the freshwater zone and the mixing of those waters that salmon have acclimated to through tens of thousands of years. Delta smelt, longfin smelt, sturgeon. Fish have evolved to this particular ecosystem, and its health feeds fisheries that run all the way from Monterey up to the Seattle area. People don't realize that the majority of commercial fishing on the West Coast is really tied to healthy Sacramento, San Joaquin estuary and Bay Delta. Another point for people to remember is that our orcas, they feed on salmon that are genetically tied to the Sacramento River. So everything that happens through the watershed just supports this chain, a chain of life that is incredible and encompassing. This is a photo. We have still been working on photo credit for this that shows at the turn of the last century. This was taken near Sacramento, the north end of the Delta. The number of salmon that could be seen at any one time from fishing. We used to can salmon in the Delta between World War I and World War II, up to about 5 million pounds a year. And it was eaten across America, canned the way we eat tuna now. And of course, after the Central Valley Project was started in the mid-1950s, commercial fishing of salmon in the Delta was actually closed. It couldn't be harvested any longer in the Delta because of depleting numbers. The Delta is also the largest stop on the Pacific Flyway. It is one of the last resting places for greater sandhill cranes. Our bird populations are just absolutely magnificent, and it's tied to healthy wetlands, healthy waterways, and productive agriculture. Things are a little bit better in the Delta with agriculture than they are from the farmers who are taking the water south of us. The Delta itself is the largest strip of prime farmland in California. It has one of the lowest pollution discharge rates because the water that the farmers take in, the next farmer is taking downstream. So they tend to have better practices. I think they're more heavily watched and monitored in addition by the water board, and I think that's helpful. And so a lot of the pollution problems that we suffer from the Delta are from actually agriculture upstream both on the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. I'm going to go through this very quickly because Regina had pulled up how the Central Valley project works. It was the first of 2 state major water projects that were built that began the exports of water from the Delta. About 45% of the water taken from the Delta goes to the Central Valley project, and it supports agriculture along the west side of those exports of the San Joaquin Valley. Westlands Water District, San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority. A lot of people will talk about and point to the farming practices of Stuart Resnick, which are also problematic, but that water gets drawn off of the state water project, even though he owns some land in Westlands. The Trump water plan is complicated and has many facets to it. One, of course, big problem is that Westland's former lobbyist, David Bernhardt, is now the Secretary of the Interior. So literally every action, everything that he can touch that involves California water has an attempt or a rollback for how we operate the Delta. First off, there has been a rollback to override the biological opinions that protect fisheries in the Delta. What does that mean? That means they claimed that there were greater allowances for greater pumping in the spring when we would turn down the pumps to protect the Delta smelt, and to also eliminate fishery protections for salmon along the biological opinions. Fortunately, groups like NRDC and the state of California are suing over those operations. This is where the state is siding with us. Yet at the same time, which is problematic, the Department of Water Resources used this kind of weakened or trumped up science to create their own long-term operation plan for the state water project, the other set of pumps, that is actually weaker than what it should be and what the standards were set for the original biological opinions. We're seeing rollbacks of the Clean Water Act every day. There's another facet that's being rolled back. Just last night, there was an announcement that they're not going to be protecting water for a certain chemical that creates brain damage in children. The list goes on day by day, and there's plenty of litigation from California and across the United States. We had the executive order a couple weeks ago where the Trump administration with David Bernhardt rolled back endangered species protections for water projects. It's really targeting California. They did a rollback on the North American Migrating Bird Treaty, which is some of the protection for those sandhill cranes and other waterfowl. So that is problematic. They have rolled back NEPA as it relates to the approval of new water projects in California. We find that very troubling for the Delta Tunnel and for the raising of Shasta Dam. Sadly, I think too many people know what this story is. As far as we're concerned, the cruelty is the point. It really takes a deliberate set of conscious actions to get up every day and figure out how you are going to weaken every last environmental protection for a region. It's very intentional. This is a photo of the State Water Project. This is near the Tehachapies, where they actually start bringing the water over the mountain into the reservoirs for Southern California. You know, in addition to the water problems, the 2 sets of pumps in California and then the lifting of the water over the mountains into Los Angeles uses about 18% of our state's total electricity capacity. So it is also a contributor to climate change, which becomes a self-defeating cycle when you're trying to protect water supply in California. It's just another view of the State Water Project. And as part of the State Water Project, we have the new Delta Conveyance Project, which is the single tunnel. We try to interject a little humor after 14 years. We kind of remember Timon and his song, Dig a Tunnel. Well, we're not interested in having that tunnel dug out. This is a photo of a map of the new alignment that is proposed. The tunnel this time around is a single tunnel. It is, its diameter is a little bit bigger than one of the two twin tunnels. I think we're looking more at 45, 50 feet in diameter. We don't, in some strange way, have a lot of specifics. Even though I sit on the community committee for the Design Construction Authority, there are about 40 of us, well, maybe 30 of us from the Delta who participate in that committee to give impact to mitigation for the project. It doesn't mean we agree with the project at all. We surprisingly don't have a lot of details. That's because the construction is ongoing. And honestly, it's also because during the process of working on this committee, what information we were told we were going to receive versus what's been made available just hasn't quite come to fruition. For instance, the last meeting, we were seeking information on traffic studies during 23 years of construction and understanding how many trucks were going to run out of one particular location, the Port of Stockton, because of the large environmental justice community there. And we've learned now that information can't be provided. The EIR, the plan and the environmental impact report are due out in 2021, I think spring 2021 to summer. And in some ways, I feel like we're in a bit of a holding pattern to see what is really proposed in the details this time. They are looking at one of two routes. They're looking again at the same route that the Twin Tunnel project was planned around last time around. They're also looking at, and I don't know why this is, bear with me. Why is this going to the end? Bear with me 1 second, please. I apologize. And let me, this time around, the project is being proposed to be moved further east, which is really problematic because you're much closer to urban populations. Around the Stockton area, you're looking at percentage-wise the largest environmental justice population in the state of California. Our people in South Stockton live at the bottom 95 percentile for health. They are surrounded by sloughs and waterways that are continuously filled with pollution and toxins and harmful algal blooms. Our kids can't even safely go out for a row or stick their toes in the water. Moving the project further east also causes extreme complications. We have the 4th highest rate of asthma. We're looking at 100 additional trucks rolling out of the Port of Stockton every day to the construction sites. We're looking at increased barge traffic, train traffic, 23 years of construction. That's nothing to be taken lightly. People say, oh, well, it's a long period, but it's not a lifetime, except if you have a child at the beginning of that period and they grow up with diminished lung capacity because of air quality problems. Moving that much soil and muck out of the area is problematic because historically, peat dust has caused lung disease in people in our region. And then there's also the issue around excavation and protecting Native American sites. We understand that the Clifton Court 4 Bay, where it exists right now, was built on top of a Yokuts village. They're looking at major expansion. We have raised, and I have raised questions to the committee, you know, what would be done to protect resources, native plants in that region. We also understand that the 3 sites that they have picked for the original intake, we work with Vice Chief Melissa Tayaba from the Shingle Springs Miwok, and also representatives from the Wilton Rancheria, that all 3 sites are the sites of historic villages for Miwok people. And so We share deeply the concern about what does this mean to protect culture and heritage from a historical standpoint for Northern California tribes, in addition to the protection of salmon. And some of the work that we have been doing, we're going to be holding a webinar ourselves on the 25th to look at some of these issues, how the Delta was built, and really what is the true history for some of our tribal partners and for other communities of color. You know, the Delta region was the region from which the genocide was launched in California historically. And so much of our area has been built on top of Yoku't villages that it seems to me that just moving forward with this project, and if consultation is not moving in a way that is appropriate for the tribes, just adds insult on top of past injury. We continue to advocate for the right kind of dialogues to be happening. This is a photo of where the water goes to on the Central Valley project, and this is the drainage impaired lands along the San Joaquin area, the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. That's the purple shading you will see. Those are the regions that Caleen was talking about that are loaded with selenium. They shouldn't be farmed. And when you irrigate on top of these bad lands, not only does the water go on the aqueduct potentially for Southern California drinking water, but Westlands is trying to move forward with approval to actually put more selenium back in the San Joaquin River, which ends up where we are in the Delta and has terrible impact in fisheries. Delta has 4 million residents. 34% of our residents make up the environmental justice community. DWR, you know, they're publishing, they've moved forward yesterday with pursuing a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers to build the project. I can't say that they're not trying to do better outreach. They are. They asked us to help with outreach. We decided not to move along with that because we felt we didn't want to be in a compromised position. But there's a difference between asking for outreach and actually having the walk match the talk. And I think where we're still suffering and still see as a real problem is that the walk isn't matching the talk. The actions don't line up for solving problems. It's just building the tunnel. Here are some of the water quality impacts that we're living with. We have toxic algal blooms. We're going to be living with the construction and operational impacts from the project. We will have greater accumulation of contaminants, including selenium in our waterways, which will end up with fish contamination and degraded water quality for our drinking water intakes and groundwater wells. We always wonder too, what's going to be the perception for Metropolitan Water District, the big group behind the tunnel, that they took the best water and left this behind for the people of the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary. When you think about where the water goes besides to Southern California, and we always know that we'll have to share a sustainable amount with people. That's why we work so hard with others down there for water projects that will actually make their water more affordable for their large environmental justice population. Yet, you know, a good 50% of the water that's coming out of the Delta continues to be used to produce almonds. Record crop last year, 2.5 billion pounds. I was updating the slide for all of you, and we had 1 million acres of almonds in 2017. Now we're up to 1.25 million acres. So I would say almonds are probably over 10% of our developed water supply in California. And that only supports about 0.2% of the state's GDP. Our better solutions for the Delta and for managing water in California include sustainable water projects. We need to upgrade levees to deal with climate change to the status recommended in the 4th climate change assessment. We need to put in type of projects throughout Southern California, all our urban areas, so that we're only required to share a sustainable yield of water, that they move towards water independence. And we need to fix existing infrastructure. That means taking down bad dams, repairing some dams where it makes sense to leave them or have them for drinking water supply. You know, but definitely not what we see as the ring dams in the Central Valley. We're talking more about, for instance, one that we've always been okay with is Los Vaqueros. It's going through an expansion. It serves an urban area. It freshens water for fish. That makes sense to us. Nothing up at all in the Sierra whatsoever. The Newsom administration is committed to the Delta Tunnel, and the Trump administration remains committed to the raising of Shasta Dam. So we have our work cut out for us. It never seems to end. And that ends this presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Barbara. And I think that Morningstar had something she needed to follow up with real quick, and then we're gonna take questions and answers. And we only have 10 minutes left, everyone.
Okay. I just wanted to share that I did mention earlier that there is a declaration of Atitlan, the first Indigenous peoples global consultation on the right to food and food sovereignty. And so sharing that the right to food for Indigenous peoples is a collective right based on our special and spiritual relationship with Mother Earth, based on our lands and territories, environment, and natural resources that provide our traditional nutrition, which nourishes our cultures, languages, social life, worldview, and relationship with Mother Earth. And so the denial to the right to food denies us our physical survival, social organization, cultures, traditions, languages, spirituality, sovereignty, and total identity. And so that is what the salmon represent for us. That is the embodiment of the salmon in relation to who we are, for our California tribes. And so I just wanted to mention that. And, you know, it's also included that, you know, the rights to lands, territory, and waters is the right to self-determination and are essential for the full realization of our food security and food sovereignty. So salmon are much more than just food or a food source, that we have that connection, we have that spiritual connection, we have that relationship with them. And so when we are fighting for the health and survival of the salmon populations, that we are fighting for the continuation of our own generations, of our children. And so, you know, that there is that relationship in our advocacy. I think that, you know, especially this week, I got, you know, some pushback even from local community members who, you know, may not necessarily agree with different methods of activism. And, you know, there's such enormous shifts that are taking place right now. You know, but my response to that is that our activism is grounded within our spirituality, and that this is very much, you know, a process of just as any ceremonial preparations, you know, that it is important, as Caleen mentioned, that using our voice to speak on behalf of the salmon, because they don't have that voice. And so that's the same relationship in protecting sacred places and fighting for our ancestral remains that are housed over in UC Berkeley. You know, that's been an ongoing fight, and that's all related, right? The incarceration of our living relatives within institutions, within prisons, you know, that started with the missions over 250 years ago, directly in relation to the incarceration of our ancestral remains, to the incarceration of our salmon being able to swim upriver right now. That's all in relationship to one another.
Thank you for that. And with that, I was hoping that Carrie could walk us through the questions and answers, or Katja.
Either way is fine. I do have them right here in front of me, and so can just get them started. The first question is from Josh K. He asks, is the paper water phenomenon a way of attempting to get around water rights, especially tribal water rights, or are there other reasons for over allocating water?
I can start with that one. I think when it comes to water rights, it's important to think that they started giving out water rights hundreds of years ago before they knew how much water actually existed. And so, I mean, I'm sure Barbara and Caleen will have things to say about this too, but I don't think it's necessarily planned. I think it's more the lack of planning and the fact that anyone who went for a water right just got one. And a lot of rivers aren't even gone through an adjudication process or a process where they saw how much water was in the rivers. So I don't think it's meant to go around tribal water rights process, because usually if you go into an adjudication, that's when tribal water rights are upheld. But I think it's more just lack of planning or foresight, and that the water rights are just given to people who want them. And that California, the most important thing that they need to do is look at their water rights process and on how to actually change that so that it does protect waters in the rivers and it makes sure that tribal water rights are allocated. But, Barbara or Caleen?
Yeah, could I add, I'd just like to add that the paper water issues, you know, when they were divvying up the paper water and how much percent that they would be allowed to be allotted, it expands past the capacity of the river by like 8 times. Why would a government or a state government agree to paper water agreements at 100% delivery on a river system that doesn't have it, other than they want to control all future water distributions? Because that water is already bought and paid for, all the way full in Shasta Lake. It's already owned. And people don't really realize that. You can't go to Shasta Lake and start taking water out. People own that water by paper water. Yep.
If there's a couple of things I think I'd like to add that I think are questions for the future. I mean, we are in the situation we're in because water rights have just kind of been given to anyone who's asked for one. So we have water rights that are, hundreds of times over what is available presently. But when you go back to the origins of how the water rights system was created, and Tim Stroshane, our policy analyst, is doing an awful lot of analysis on this. What would the water rights system look like if tribal people were not removed from the Delta? What would the water rights system look like if the policy of genocide hadn't moved forward and it was sponsored by the state after the federal government? And how does that all tie up into what happened with the water rights system? Because it seems to us that if you're going to really do some of the things that Governor Newsom talked about with his policy address, which he reiterated yesterday on Twitter, to try to get to a place of reconciliation with California tribes, that those are questions that need to be asked and answered and perhaps dealt with legally. How did those policies lead to a loss of water rights for Native people? I think there's a lot more work that has to be done there.
Definitely. Yeah. And also, people need to think about, people don't really know what's good for water or how to distribute the water other than their own personal profitable way of life that they're looking at. But, we also need to have water rights for nature and water rights for the salmon and water rights for the river itself. And right now, we're up against every drop of water that goes to the ocean is a wasted drop of water that could have been put on a farm. And so they want to divert everything. But we haven't, people have not made the best choices about water, and maybe we shouldn't have water rights. We're bad little children, and we shouldn't be doing stuff like that because they don't know how to sing to water, they don't know how to be good to water, they don't know how to pray to water, and they only know how to commodify it.
True. It's true.
Thank you, everybody, for answering that. We have quite a few questions, so I'm going to try to combine a couple. There are several people who have asked how they can be involved, or if there's a list of opportunities or meetings to show up as a representative. So I guess that's probably the best way to go next.
I don't know how you stay tuned, but
we always have petitions on our Save California Salmon website and Facebook page. And I know Winnemem Wintu also keeps their page updated, and so does Restore the Delta.
Yeah, and you just have to be ready to go to a meeting tomorrow night in the middle of the week at 2:00 in the afternoon. That's how the meetings hit us. Since we're not really in the planning part of those and included in the guest lists. But we could use a whole lot more people interested in asking questions and being present at those meetings.
Thank you for answering those. The next question comes from Hannah, and she asks, where did the selenium contamination come from and what caused the imbalance?
Oh, you can do that, Barbara.
The selenium is a natural occurring substance in the soils of the San Joaquin Valley, which at one time was actually an inland sea. And so the sea evaporated and you were left with salts, selenium, boron, and bromide in the soil. Selenium is something we all have inside of us. We're supposed to have a little tiny bit that's good for our health. The problem is that it's impossible to get out, even with brackish water desalination projects that they've done from the salt contamination. They can extract the salt. They can't seem to rid themselves of the selenium. And so the selenium comes out in unsafe quantities out of the water. It goes back into the groundwater system, back into the river. And then it lands in the delta. It's consumed by fish. It ends up in fish tissue, which of course is, we have 40,000 subsistence fishers in the delta. It's a threat to them. I'm not, and of course we had the tragedy of Kesterson, where we lost all those birds 30 years ago from damage from selenium. So there is a way that it kind of exists or kind of sinks into kind of, I want to say, a sand water or a soil water kind of scenario or a mixture that we have in the delta as well. It could happen in the delta as well if there's increased selenium pollution.
And I would like to add to that one of the things that a lot of us are asking for is for the selenium impaired lands, that especially that Westlands farms on, to be retired. Because a lot of the water that's taken out from the upper part of California, from Winnemem Wintu land and from the Trinity River, are diverted to Westlands land, and it's used to farm land that is not appropriate for farming. So if that land was retired and the water rights were allowed to go into the rivers for the fish, that would be a win-win for everyone. Because like Barbara said, such an issue.
It'd be a win for the fish, it'd be a win for the people of the delta. And you know what? It also would be a win for other water users. There's only so much water. You have to have some agriculture, of course, and it would free up water for better, productive, more sustainable agriculture as well. So it would be a win for a lot of people, just not that 0.3% of our ag business industry in California.
And we are at time. So I would say one more question and then let's close it up.
Sure, sounds good. So the last question I think is a really great one from Heather. She says, can you talk a little bit about how farmers and tribes can do work together?
That's a tough question.
Well, it depends where you are, maybe. I mean, one of the reasons we are holding one of the webinars we are to talk about this history is to really try to promote better communication between our Delta farm owners and landowners and tribal interests in California and the surrounding environmental justice communities. We think the more that we speak about the truth, the better and easier it is to promote alliances. And I think that there's a lot of cross similarity for Delta farmers and for tribal people about wanting to protect flows, wanting to have a clean water supply. And, you know, the truth and reconciliation part for that is how do we go back and honor the true history of what's happened to tribes, and, you know, what are the issues in California around compensation for what happened in the Delta versus the way things kind of exist now. How do we honor and protect burial sites in villages in an area that has been farmed over? You know, we're not the people to represent that, but we are at least trying to make sure that the conversation will be had as time goes on.
I would like to mention too that it's not like all farmers that are the problem. It's these large agro businesses such as Westlands Water District and like big corporate farmers. I mean, there are definitely farmers within the Delta that are probably sustainable and doing things where they don't use a lot of water to do things the right way. And that we have to change the way that we think about water in farming and get away from toxic farming and large agribusiness that happens in the desert, way far away from water is. We need localized water supplies and localized farms.
Yeah.
And
maybe it takes the farmers to realize what's happening upstream, up the rivers, where that water comes from, and start making some progress towards rehabbing and restoring the riverbeds where they're getting their water from. Because you can't just keep taking and taking from the rivers off the mountains and never give anything back. Never do anything to restore it. I mean, you know, tribes were up there propagating the plants, you know, cultivating water systems, assisting the salmon to get over jumps so they could go farther up to create the water beds, and breathing of the groundwater system comes from that. And so our farmers need to recognize it's not just, you know, irrigation water that they need to be worried about or educated about, but also, you know, come on our side of this, because we don't own anything in the mountains and we don't own anything in the farms. We don't own anything along the river, but our heart is there. And our concern for our future generations is there. And if farmers are going to continue, then they have to get to good farming, you know, good farming practices that are sustainable and aren't just for profit.
Okay, well, with that, we have to end. And I'm sorry about that. But next week, we're going to be back talking about the Eel River and about the work to stop so many diversions out of the Eel River to the Russian River, but also about taking down dams. There's a big push right now to take down at least one dam and possibly two on the Eel River as part of the Potter Valley Project dam relicensing. And we will be joined by the Round Valley Tribe, the Wiyot Tribe, and Friends of the Eel River. And we are really excited that you were able to make it today. And if you need any additional resources, please go to the Save California Salmon website. You can contact me if you have more questions after this. And there will always be action alerts on our petition site on change.org and on our Facebook page and Twitter and Instagram pages. Thank you again, Barbara, Morningstar, and Caleen, and thank you for all of your great work and for joining us here today. And have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.